"Sir, don't touch that painting." The command cracked through the polished silence of the luxury gallery so sharply that every nearby conversation stopped in the middle of a sentence. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across marble floors, champagne glasses froze in midair, and dozens of distinguished guests turned toward the lone black man standing only inches from the centerpiece of the evening's exhibition. Marcus Ellington lowered his hand before his fingertips ever reached the canvas. His expression never changed. He simply looked at the security guard who had rushed between him and the painting as though he had seen this exact moment play out years before. The guard squared his shoulders. "Collectors only," he repeated, louder this time, making sure the surrounding crowd heard every word. A woman in an elegant ivory blazer, the gallery's event director, stepped forward with practiced confidence and an unmistakable smile that never reached her eyes. "Sir, this area is reserved for invited patrons. I'd appreciate it if you stepped back." Several guests exchanged knowing glances. One older white collector adjusted his tuxedo cuffs and whispered just loudly enough for those beside him to hear, "Every exclusive event attracts someone hoping to look important." Soft laughter drifted through the room like invisible smoke. Marcus remained exactly where he was. He wore dark jeans, clean leather shoes, and a charcoal jacket without a designer logo. No expensive watch caught the light. No entourage surrounded him. No photographer followed his movements. To everyone watching, he looked like a visitor who had wandered into a room built for someone else. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus Ellington. The event director folded her hands politely. "May I see your invitation?" Marcus met her gaze without the slightest hint of irritation. "I didn't bring one." The answer landed exactly as she expected. Her smile widened. "Then I'm afraid you'll have to leave the exhibition floor." Around them, conversations resumed, but quieter now, fueled by curiosity rather than art. A young couple paused beside a sculpture, pretending to admire it while watching every second unfold. A photographer slowly lowered his camera. Near the registration desk, a college-aged intern frowned at the guest list on her tablet before looking back toward Marcus with growing uncertainty, as though something about his face seemed strangely familiar. Marcus ignored every stare. His eyes returned to the enormous oil painting hanging beneath its own dedicated spotlight. Rich blues blended into deep golds, layered with bold brushstrokes that carried both triumph and pain. He studied every detail with the quiet concentration of someone remembering rather than discovering. The security guard noticed his lingering attention and stepped even closer. "I said back away from the painting." The gallery seemed to shrink around those words. No one realized that the masterpiece commanding the room held a truth far greater than its multimillion-dollar price tag. In only a few moments, the smallest detail hidden in plain sight would force every person standing beneath those lights to question everything they believed they had just witnessed. Marcus Ellington did not argue because experience had taught him that some people made their decisions long before the first word was spoken. He simply took one slow step backward, slipped both hands into the pockets of his charcoal jacket, and continued studying the painting from where he now stood. The security guard interpreted the silence as surrender. The event director interpreted it as embarrassment. The guests interpreted it as proof that they had judged correctly. None of them noticed the faint smile that appeared for less than a second before disappearing again. The painting dominated the gallery wall, stretching nearly 8 feet across in layers of brilliant color that seemed to change with every angle of light. Reporters had called it the defining work of contemporary American art. Critics described it as priceless. Collectors had reportedly offered more than $20 million, yet the owner had refused every offer. Tonight marked the first public exhibition since it had disappeared into a private collection nearly 6 years earlier. People had traveled from across the country simply to stand in front of it for a few minutes. Marcus stood there as though greeting an old friend. His eyes followed every brushstroke with remarkable precision, lingering on tiny details that most visitors overlooked entirely. The event director noticed his attention and folded her arms. "You seem very interested in the artwork," she said with polite sarcasm. "Most people admire it from a respectful distance." Marcus nodded once. "I know every inch of it." A nearby collector laughed openly. "That is quite a statement." Another guest added, "Everyone suddenly becomes an expert when they walk into a gallery." More quiet laughter drifted through the room. Marcus offered no reply. Across the lobby, the young intern quietly reopened the digital catalog assigned to the exhibition. Something continued bothering her. She remembered spending hours organizing biographies, insurance documents, and artist records earlier that week. She searched through page after page until a familiar name almost appeared in her memory before slipping away again. She looked toward Marcus once more. There was something unmistakably calm about him. Not the calm of someone hoping to be accepted, but the calm of someone who already belonged. The security guard interrupted her thoughts by stepping even closer to Marcus. "Sir, I need you to move farther back behind the velvet line." Marcus complied without hesitation. He never protested. He never rolled his eyes. He never raised his voice. Instead, he glanced briefly around the gallery. Crystal glasses reflected warm light. Wealthy patrons admired one another almost as much as the artwork itself. Waiters carried silver trays through conversations about auctions, investments, and exclusive collections. It was a room built around appearances, and appearances had already delivered their verdict on him. The event director quietly spoke into her headset, asking another member of the staff to remain nearby in case the situation escalated. She believed she was protecting the evening from disruption. Marcus understood she was protecting assumptions instead. Near the entrance, the intern finally found the archived exhibition file she had been searching for. Her heartbeat quickened as she stared at a single line on the screen. Before she could read further, another employee called her name, breaking her concentration. She locked the tablet and hurried away, unaware that the answer everyone in the gallery was looking for had almost revealed itself without a single word from the man they continued pretending did not belong. The atmosphere inside the gallery continued to tighten without anyone raising their voice. Expensive conversations slowly gave way to whispered judgments, and every glance seemed to settle on Marcus Ellington a little longer than before. The event director folded the guest list against her tablet and offered another rehearsed smile. Perhaps she would be more comfortable enjoying the exhibition from the public viewing area downstairs. Marcus looked at her calmly. "I am already exactly where I intended to be." His answer carried no anger, only certainty, and somehow that unsettled her more than an argument would have. A wealthy collector holding a crystal glass stepped closer with an amused expression. "Confidence is admirable," he said. "But exclusive events have rules." Another guest nodded. "Everyone thinks they deserve access these days." Quiet agreement rippled through the circle. Marcus remained focused on the painting. His eyes paused near the lower corner of the canvas before drifting across its sweeping colors again. It was almost as though he was silently inspecting details no one else even noticed. The security guard shifted his stance and extended one arm toward the velvet rope. "Sir, this is the final time I am asking. Please step farther back." Marcus complied once more, taking a measured step without the slightest sign of frustration. The guests interpreted his composure as defeat. The event director interpreted it as compliance. Marcus interpreted it as patience. Across the room the young intern finally returned, still carrying the tablet pressed tightly against her chest. She glanced from the screen to Marcus, then back again. The artist biography attached to the exhibition had been marked confidential until opening night, and several pages remained restricted even to junior staff. She could only see fragments of archived notes, yet one sentence continued echoing in her memory from the installation meeting earlier that week. Someone had mentioned that the creator insisted on attending quietly before the formal presentation. She had dismissed it at the time. Now she was no longer certain. Before she could approach, the event director noticed her hesitation. "Emily," she called firmly, "please assist our guests at the entrance." Emily hesitated for only a second before obeying, but she looked back one more time at Marcus with growing curiosity. Near the refreshment table, another guest lifted his phone, quietly taking a photograph of the confrontation. "This is unbelievable," he whispered to his companion. "Imagine showing up without credentials at a private unveiling." His companion shrugged. "Some people just like attention." Marcus heard every word, yet his expression never changed. He had spent too many years learning that assumptions usually spoke louder than facts. The event director took one slow breath before speaking into her headset again. "Please notify the curator that we may have an unregistered visitor refusing to leave the exhibition floor." The message sounded procedural, but everyone standing nearby heard it. Several guests instinctively stepped farther away from Marcus as though official language somehow confirmed unofficial conclusions. Marcus finally reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The security guard immediately stiffened, expecting an argument or another invitation that would prove invalid. Instead, Marcus removed nothing more than a slim black business card holder. He looked at it for a brief moment, then quietly returned it to his pocket without opening it. He was not ready to explain himself. Not yet. Somewhere beyond the gallery doors, footsteps moved quickly down the marble hallway, and although no one inside realized it, the person hurrying toward the exhibition knew exactly whose presence had just changed the entire evening. Emily could not shake the feeling that she had overlooked something important. She walked toward the registration desk with measured steps, reopened the restricted exhibition records, and carefully searched through the archived installation notes one more time. Most of the files remained locked behind curator authorization, but one sentence caught her attention before the screen refreshed. It read, "Creator requests anonymous arrival before formal acknowledgement." Her heartbeat quickened. She looked up immediately. Marcus Ellington still stood quietly near the velvet rope, studying the painting with the kind of familiarity that no ordinary visitor could imitate. Every few seconds his eyes paused on another tiny detail hidden within the layers of color, almost as though he remembered placing each brushstroke himself. Emily looked back at the screen, but the file had already closed. Before she could reopen it, the event director approached. "Emily, why are you still standing here?" she asked. "The guest list is already checked." Emily hesitated. "I think I may have seen his name earlier this week during the installation briefing." The event director barely glanced toward Marcus before dismissing the idea with a quiet laugh. "You are new. You are confusing names. Every major exhibition includes hundreds of artists, donors, consultants, and sponsors." Emily lowered her voice. "I understand, but something about him feels familiar." The event director smiled patiently, the kind of smile reserved for correcting someone without inviting further discussion. "Trust experience over instinct. If he belonged here, we would already know exactly who he is." Emily nodded politely, but doubt refused to disappear. Nearby, the collector who had mocked Marcus earlier continued entertaining a small circle of guests. "Exclusive galleries survive because they maintain standards," he declared while swirling the last sip of sparkling water inside his glass. "Anyone can admire art. Not everyone belongs in rooms where history is made." Several guests quietly agreed. Marcus heard every word without reacting. His posture remained relaxed, his breathing steady, his attention fixed on the canvas. The silence surrounding him had become strangely powerful. It no longer resembled uncertainty. It resembled patience. One elderly woman standing near the sculpture gallery observed him carefully before whispering to her husband, "Does he seem nervous to you?" Her husband watched Marcus for a moment before answering softly, "No. He looks like someone waiting for everyone else to catch up." Those words lingered in Emily's mind. She opened the exhibition catalog once more, scrolling through pages until she reached a heavily blurred artist profile. Almost every identifying detail remained hidden, yet one visible line described the creator as both an internationally recognized entrepreneur and an award-winning painter who preferred anonymity at public unveilings. Emily slowly lifted her eyes toward Marcus again. The description fit him far too well to ignore. She took one cautious step in his direction before another staff member stopped her to answer a question from arriving patrons. Across the room, the event director quietly instructed the security guard to remain alert. "He continues refusing to leave," she whispered. "Until the curator arrives, we cannot take chances." Marcus finally shifted his gaze away from the painting and glanced toward Emily. Their eyes met for only a brief second. He offered a small, reassuring nod, almost as though he understood exactly what she had begun to realize. Emily felt the pieces falling into place, but before she could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the marble hallway outside the gallery, and every second brought whoever was approaching closer to the room where assumptions were about to collide with undeniable truth. The hurried footsteps stopped just outside the exhibition hall, but whoever had been approaching did not enter. The brief silence only heightened the tension already filling the room. The event director glanced toward the entrance, then back at Marcus Ellington with renewed confidence. "Until we receive confirmation," she said firmly, "I need you to leave the exhibition space." Marcus looked at her without resentment. "I can wait." His answer was calm, almost gentle, yet it seemed to frustrate her even more. "This is not a waiting area," she replied. "This evening is reserved for invited patrons, collectors, and individuals connected to the exhibition." Marcus nodded slightly. "I understand." The simplicity of his response left her with nothing to argue against, so she turned toward the security guard. "Please make sure he remains outside the viewing line." The guard stepped forward and extended an open hand, indicating the direction of the entrance without touching Marcus. "Sir, right this way." Marcus quietly stepped away from the velvet rope, stopping only a few feet farther back. His eyes never left the painting. The collector who had mocked him earlier shook his head with a satisfied smile. "There it is," he said to those gathered nearby. "People always know when it is time to stop pretending." Several guests chuckled softly. One woman added, "Some places simply are not meant for everyone." Those words drifted through the gallery like a familiar echo. Marcus had heard versions of them his entire life. They did not surprise him anymore. Instead, they awakened a memory he rarely allowed himself to revisit. 22 years earlier, he had stood outside a small gallery in Chicago carrying a portfolio filled with paintings created during sleepless nights after college classes. He remembered wearing the only blazer he owned, carefully protecting every canvas from the rain. Before anyone looked at his work, someone at the front desk had smiled politely and said, "We are looking for artists who fit the image of this exhibition." He had understood exactly what that sentence meant. He had walked back to his apartment carrying every painting home untouched. That night he made himself a promise. If the doors would not open for him, he would build rooms where talent mattered more than appearance. The memory faded as quickly as it had arrived. Marcus returned his attention to the present. The masterpiece hanging beneath the spotlight had begun as one of those forgotten sketches from decades ago. Every color layered across the canvas represented years of persistence, rejection, discipline, and quiet determination. Emily watched him from across the room, and for the first time she noticed something remarkable. Marcus was not looking at the painting with admiration. He was looking at it with remembrance. There was affection in his eyes, but also responsibility, as though the artwork carried a piece of his own life. She felt a chill run through her. The event director noticed Emily staring again. "Please stop watching him and assist the guests," she instructed. Emily nodded automatically, yet she remained rooted where she stood. Every instinct told her that the room was moving toward an enormous mistake. Marcus finally reached into his jacket pocket once more, removed his phone, and unlocked the screen. He tapped a single contact and waited only a moment before the call connected. His voice remained steady and almost conversational. "Good evening. I have arrived. There seems to be a small misunderstanding. Would you please let the chief curator know that Marcus Ellington is waiting inside the main gallery?" He ended the call without another word, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and resumed looking at the painting. Around him, several guests exchanged amused smiles, convinced they had just witnessed one last attempt to save face. None of them realized that the quiet phone call had already begun changing the direction of the entire evening. The gallery settled into an uneasy calm after Marcus Ellington ended the call. No dramatic announcement followed. No immediate interruption came from the entrance. That silence encouraged the guests to believe nothing had changed at all. The collector who had been entertaining the crowd lifted his glass again with a satisfied smile. "That usually happens," he said. "People make one phone call hoping someone important will rescue them." A few guests laughed politely before returning their attention to the artwork. The event director relaxed for the first time all evening. "Thank you for cooperating," she told Marcus. "Someone from guest relations will be available shortly to assist you downstairs." Marcus answered with the same steady composure he had maintained from the beginning. "I appreciate your concern." His calm response made the conversation feel strangely one-sided. It was as though he had already accepted an outcome that no one else could yet see. Emily quietly reopened her tablet one more time. She ignored every instruction to help at the front entrance and instead searched the exhibition archive using only 2 words. Marcus Ellington. This time the system responded differently. A secure notification appeared requesting curator authorization. Before she could continue, another message briefly flashed across the screen. Authorized personnel notified. Primary contact en route. The notice disappeared almost immediately, but Emily had already read enough. Her breathing slowed as certainty replaced doubt. She looked across the gallery at Marcus. He was not waiting to be recognized. He was waiting for everyone else to discover what had been true from the moment he walked through the doors. At the far end of the hall, a pair of museum technicians suddenly stood aside as a distinguished man in his early 60s appeared, walking briskly through the corridor with unmistakable purpose. His silver hair was neatly combed, and an exhibition credential hung from his jacket. Several employees immediately recognized him and straightened their posture. "The chief curator is here," someone whispered. The event director smiled with relief, convinced the situation would finally be resolved in her favor. She walked confidently toward him before he had taken more than a few steps into the gallery. "Dr. Whitmore," she began. "We have a gentleman who entered the restricted exhibition area without proper verification. We have been attempting to escort him to the public floor." Dr. Whitmore barely acknowledged her explanation. His eyes continued scanning the room until they stopped on Marcus. For a brief moment he simply stood there. Then his expression changed completely. Surprise gave way to concern, and concern quickly became embarrassment. Without another question, he walked past the event director, past the security guard, and directly toward Marcus. The conversations throughout the gallery faded into silence one by one as guests noticed the unexpected shift. Emily watched with growing anticipation. The event director blinked in confusion before hurrying after the curator. "Dr. Whitmore," she called, "we have the situation under control." He did not answer. Every step carried him closer to Marcus until only a few feet separated them. Marcus finally looked away from the painting and met the curator's eyes with a calm smile that suggested they had known each other for many years. Around them, every guest instinctively stopped speaking. Crystal glasses remained suspended in midair. Cameras lowered. Even the security guard seemed uncertain whether to remain where he stood or step aside. The room had reached the edge of a revelation, and although no one yet understood why the chief curator had crossed the entire gallery without hesitation, everyone could feel that the balance of power had begun shifting in a direction none of them had expected. Dr. Whitmore stopped directly in front of Marcus Ellington, and for one suspended moment the gallery seemed to forget how to breathe. The chief curator lowered his head respectfully before extending both hands. "Mr. Ellington," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room, "I sincerely apologize for keeping you waiting. We did not expect your arrival to be this discreet." Marcus accepted the handshake with the same quiet composure he had shown since entering the gallery. "Good evening, Arthur," he replied. "I wanted the painting to have everyone's attention before I did." Confused whispers spread through the guests like ripples across still water. The event director stared in disbelief. Dr. Whitmore, she interrupted carefully, there must be some misunderstanding. This gentleman entered the restricted exhibition without verification. Arthur Whitmore slowly turned toward her. The disappointment on his face required no raised voice. There is no misunderstanding, he answered. The only misunderstanding is that no one thought to ask who he was before deciding he did not belong. The room fell completely silent. Emily felt her heart racing as every piece finally locked into place. The collector who had spent the evening mocking Marcus lowered his glass but said nothing. Arthur Whitmore stepped beside the massive canvas and gestured toward its lower right corner. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, before tonight officially begins, there is something every guest deserves to see. Dozens of people instinctively moved closer. Some lifted their phones. Others leaned forward, trying to understand what had suddenly become so important. Arthur pointed toward a section of the painting that most visitors had overlooked because of the dramatic lighting. Beneath layers of rich blue and gold pigment, elegantly woven into the final brushstrokes, rested a signature. It had never been hidden. It had simply gone unnoticed. Arthur spoke slowly enough for every syllable to settle over the room. Marcus Ellington. The words echoed through the gallery with astonishing weight. Several guests immediately looked from the signature back to the man standing only a few feet away. The event director's confident posture disappeared. Her expression shifted from certainty to confusion and then to unmistakable shock. The collector blinked repeatedly as though another glance might somehow change what he had just seen. Emily covered her mouth, unable to hide her relief. Arthur continued, the masterpiece you have admired all evening was created by the man standing before you. Every publication praising this work, every museum requesting it, every collector attempting to purchase it has been speaking about Marcus Ellington for years. Marcus remained exactly where he stood. He did not smile with triumph. He did not celebrate. He simply looked at the painting once more before quietly saying, I always believed the work should speak before the artist. Arthur nodded respectfully. It certainly has. Then Marcus slowly turned toward the event director and the security guard. His voice remained calm, measured, and impossible to ignore. You stopped me from standing beside my own painting. Not because you knew anything about me, but because you believed you already did. No one answered. The silence itself became the response. Every assumption that had filled the gallery only minutes earlier collapsed beneath a single signature that had been visible the entire time, waiting patiently for someone willing to look closely enough to see it. No one moved for several long seconds. The gallery that had been filled with confident opinions only moments earlier now echoed with nothing except quiet breathing and the faint hum of the climate control system protecting the priceless artwork. The collector who had spoken the loudest slowly lowered his eyes to the marble floor, unable to look at Marcus Ellington or the signature at the same time. The event director stood frozen beside the velvet rope, her carefully rehearsed confidence dissolving beneath the weight of a mistake that could not be explained away. Arthur Whitmore turned toward the guests with calm authority. This exhibition was designed to celebrate artistic vision, he said. Instead, many of you have just witnessed how quickly appearances can replace curiosity. His words were not angry. They were simply true, and that made them impossible to dismiss. Emily quietly stepped forward until she stood beside Marcus. I am sorry, she said sincerely. I should have trusted what I remembered instead of assuming I was mistaken. Marcus gave her a warm smile. You asked questions. That is how truth usually begins. Emily nodded, visibly relieved. The security guard removed his earpiece and spoke with genuine regret. Mr. Ellington, I apologize. I believed I was following procedure. Marcus looked at him for a brief moment before answering. Procedure protects people only when it is guided by fairness. The guard lowered his head in acknowledgement. The event director finally found her voice. Mr. Ellington, I sincerely apologize for how you were treated this evening. We reached conclusions before asking the simplest question. Marcus remained composed. A question would have taken seconds. Assumptions took the entire evening. Around the room, guests began seeing the painting differently. They no longer admired only the colors or the extraordinary composition. They now understood that every brushstroke represented the journey of the very man they had watched being excluded from his own creation. Several collectors quietly approached Marcus, asking whether they might introduce themselves properly. Others requested photographs or expressed admiration for his work. Marcus greeted each person with courtesy, showing no trace of resentment. The contrast did not escape anyone's attention. Respect had arrived only after recognition, and that realization weighed heavily throughout the gallery. Arthur Whitmore addressed the museum staff. Effective immediately, I want every member of our visitor services team to participate in additional hospitality and inclusion training before our next major exhibition. Every guest deserves dignity before credentials, and every artist deserves respect before recognition. The employees nodded in agreement. Even the event director accepted the instruction without hesitation. Across the gallery, conversations changed completely. Guests who had remained silent during the confrontation now admitted they should have spoken sooner. Others reflected quietly on how easily they had accepted another person's judgment without asking for evidence. Emily looked around the room and realized that the painting itself had not changed at all. The colors were identical. The signature had always been there. The only thing that had changed was what people were finally willing to see. Marcus turned once more toward the canvas that had traveled with him through decades of persistence. Under the warm gallery lights, the signature appeared no brighter than it had an hour earlier, yet somehow it now seemed impossible for anyone in the room to overlook it ever again. The evening continued, but it no longer resembled the event that had begun less than an hour earlier. Guests who had arrived expecting to witness the unveiling of a celebrated masterpiece left carrying something far more valuable than photographs or conversations about art. They carried an unforgettable lesson about how easily appearances can distort judgment. Marcus Ellington remained beside the painting for a few quiet moments while the crowd respectfully gave him space. He looked once more at the signature resting in the corner of the canvas, not with pride alone, but with gratitude for every difficult chapter that had led him there. Arthur Whitmore joined him again and smiled. "Your work has inspired millions," he said. "Tonight your example may inspire even more." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Art has always been about helping people see what they missed the first time they looked. Arthur glanced around the gallery. "I believe that happened tonight." Emily approached carrying the exhibition catalog she had been holding throughout the evening. "Would you sign this for me?" she asked quietly. Marcus accepted the catalog with a warm smile. Before writing his name, he paused. "What is your name?" he asked. "Emily," she answered. He carefully signed the inside cover and added one short sentence beneath his signature. "Never let curiosity surrender to assumptions." Emily read the words twice before closing the book. "I will remember that," she said. Marcus smiled. "That is worth more than remembering my name." Nearby, the collector who had mocked him earlier finally stepped forward. His confidence had disappeared, replaced by genuine humility. "Mr. Ellington," he said, "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew anything about you." Marcus looked at him calmly. "I accept your apology. I only hope the next person you meet receives your questions before your conclusions." The collector nodded quietly. No further explanation was necessary. One by one, the guests resumed walking through the exhibition. This time they stopped longer in front of every painting, reading every artist biography with greater care, speaking more softly than before. The atmosphere had changed because the people inside it had changed. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus prepared to leave exactly as he had arrived, without an entourage, without fanfare, and without asking for special treatment. He thanked Arthur, shook hands with the staff, and wished Emily success in her career before walking toward the entrance. Several guests watched him leave, realizing that true influence rarely announced itself with luxury or status. It revealed itself through character. Outside, the city lights reflected across the sidewalk as Marcus disappeared into the evening, leaving behind a gallery that would remember this night for far more than the unveiling of a famous painting. Long after the final guests departed and the lights dimmed over the exhibition hall, one image remained fixed in everyone's memory. It was not the marble floors, the elegant chandeliers, or even the masterpiece itself. It was the quiet dignity of a man who never raised his voice, never demanded recognition, and never allowed another person's prejudice to define his worth. The signature on the painting proved who created the masterpiece, but Marcus Ellington's character proved something even greater. Respect should never be earned by wealth, fame, or appearances. It should be given because every person deserves to be seen before they are judged.